Hello, 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 and welcome to Kindred Skulls. We are now in day 3 of the Minnesota Vikings as a leaderless organization. The season is over, and Kirk Cousins is still on the roster. How's it going? My name is Greg Blake. I am one of the co-hosts here tonight, and I'm joined, as always, by my lovely and talented and brilliant co-hosts. Nick Olson, how are you this evening?
I'm doing well, Grego. Good to see you in your Dalvin Cook jersey, representing.
Of course. Dalvin's my MVP this year. Matt, how are you? Matt Freese, everybody, how are you this evening?
Doing great, Greg. I bought a car this week, so that's been a lot of fun. And I guess the Vikings sent us off with a win. So
yeah,
it could have been a worse end to the season. I mean, obviously a disappointment, but we'll get into that.
Little feel good, kind of feeling right at the end of the year. That's not a bad thing. Okay, so that's it. I mean, the season's done. What on earth is there to talk about? Let's talk about
there's a lot to talk about, isn't there, Greg?
Quite a bit. Let's talk about the Bears game first. Like you just said, it was a good feeling to end the season with a win. I mean, I'll be honest with you, I barely was coherent during that game. I was really not paying very much attention. I knew it was happening. I was raging in the first half about our lack of offensive firepower, and then the second half everything went our way and we won. And it was a game. It happened. It didn't mean anything, but we won. What did you guys think of the Bears game? How did you feel about it?
Well, first of all, what a rough first half, right? Especially on the offensive side of the ball. Like, the offensive line was atrocious. And even Brian O'Neill screwed up quite a few times. I remember from going back to the tape, 46 kind of popped off a little bit. I think it is like Azur Kamara or something. I don't really know who that is.
Vikings always making these randos just pop up.
They just made, or 90. It was that Angelo Blackson who got the sack and a couple of stuff. Like, it's like, the first sack of Kirk was they failed to properly pass off a stunt, right? Like, this is it wasn't like it was a unique stunt or anything like that. Like, it's pretty basic stuff that they should have, you'd hope, guys that played most of the season together. It's not like, like we had to shuffle in and out of the lineup for like COVID issues or like injury issues at left tackle, but like Oliudo played a lot of right guard this year. Brian O'Neill played right tackle the whole season. Garrett Bradbury played most of the season at center. So it's not like these guys were like new and we're trying to like figure out communication stuff. It's like, this is who our offensive line is. And then Kirk wasn't really helping the issue in the first half, but I don't know how much he is to blame for this.
He was brutal in the first half.
I mean, 3 of the first 4 drives were 3 and outs, which is all too familiar for us Vikings fans this year. There's just, it was the same old thing. We tried a couple of deep shots, and when they didn't connect, it was like, okay, well, I guess we're going to run for no gain, and then we're going to throw short of the sticks on third down and pretend we're the 49ers, but we don't have Deebo Samuel on, so we're not going to get the yak that we need. So punt away. So, yeah, it was frustrating. The offensive line was awful. But they kind of clicked together. I mean, the 2-minute offense was surprisingly effective. Kirk threw a couple like back-to-back bangers, and then the second half offense was just completely different. So really frustrating to start. At the first, I was like, well, at least we're getting a higher draft pick. Whatever, I'll live with it.
Yeah, right.
And the second half, I was like, Patrick Peterson, pick 6. This is awesome. I'm loving it.
That was a cool moment.
For watching the broadcast, that was a lot of fun too, because Aqib Talib, who is the color guy, right, is like, I guess Pat Pete had promised that if he got a pick this game, which it would have been his only season without a pick if he had not gotten it, he was going to give the ball to Talib's son. So that was like a fun side plot to the storyline, honestly.
A fun side plot. And also, I will say, Patrick Peterson was a complete professional all season long. I'm glad he got at least something at the end of the year.
And he was good. He was good for us this year. Like, he was the consistent. Nobody else in our corner room was consistent, right? Dan Slayer, I think, had a pretty good PFF grade at the end of the year, but he was up and down in terms of play overall. Like, Patrick Peterson, game in and game out, played very well. And actually, to be honest with you, watching this game, I thought it might have been his worst game of the year. He got torched quite a few times by like Mooney, and I think he got Bird and Allen Robinson both got him too. So like, but overall, like,
he got the pick.
he lived up to his contract, which was pretty high, right? And he lived up to the expectations that I think we, what we had hoped for him at the beginning of the year.
Right. Did you guys have any so it's the last game of the year.
Mm-hmm.
It's the last impression all these guys get to make, either for the Vikings or another team that might be interested in them in the offseason. Some of the aging vets maybe trying to put some stuff together to get that last contract. Was anybody standing out to you? Did anybody pop out to you guys while you were watching the game? Anybody that you're like, I really like to point out how good a game they had to finish the year?
The guy that pops out to me the most, and this is kind of why I'm happy either way, losing and getting a better draft pick or winning, because when you win, there's usually guys that you can build around, because it's easier to go into an offseason. It's easier to build a good team when you're 8-9 going into the offseason than going into the offseason 7-10. And I feel like one of those difference makers that really popped off was Amir Smith-Marset, who, just from the stat line, obviously he really pops out with, what was it, like over 100 yards? It was
100, three catches, 100 something yards.
Yeah, Randy Moss stat line right there, just minus 3 touchdowns. But he was really impressive. And on tape, I thought it was even more impressive. The broadcast, obviously, you show the nice catches and everything, but his route running was really good. I was really impressed with his releases. I was really impressed with his burst and his ability to stack guys immediately. And they pressed him a lot, and he kind of is more of a wiry guy, so you would think that would make sense. But he had a couple different kinds of releases with really sort of physical. He's not like Diggs beating press just with his legs and lower body half. He's beating guys by sort of barreling them over, or like getting his arm into their armpit and just sort of like shoving them to the side of the ground, and like engaging and welcoming contact. So that along with just how fast he is once he gets into the stem of his routes and can stack guys was really encouraging. The deep half, the shot he had at the end of the second half, where Cousins kind of stepped up in the pocket and chucked it downfield, that was a really good adjust. I mean, it was a nice ball by Kirk, but it was a really impressive adjustment by Smith-Marset. Like Cousins he saw that it was one-on-one coverage, and that I think he was running a fade route to the left side of the boundary. And Smith-Marset was able to just sort of like turn around, adjust to the ball, come back to it, and dive. And it was kind of like an awkward adjustment he had to make. But wide receiver there making Cousins look, I think, a little bit better than the throw necessarily. I mean, the ball was where it's supposed to go in that situation, but it's still a tricky adjustment to make. So I think what he was doing in the game made you think like, okay, if this guy's our wide receiver 4 going into next year, that's not a bad setup. I mean, he looked pretty darn good. So this is the sort of stuff I was hoping I could see from D.D. Westbrook this year. So he in particular, there were a few different performances I really liked, but his, I think, was one of the more encouraging, because we haven't seen much of him yet. Whereas before I wasn't sure he was a building block for the future, now I think he can be part of the wide receiver room that Keenan McCardell, if they keep him, which I believe they will, because he's done a great job with KJ Osborne and everyone else, you can start to build around some of these guys.
Yeah, and just to add a couple of things there, I think that play you're talking about was against Jalen Johnson too, right? Who's like the Bears' best corner by far, and he's a pretty quality player. And then on top of that, like you mentioned, if we have a wide receiver room that's our top 4 guys of Jefferson, Thielen, KJ Osborne, and then Smith-Marset continues to develop, I think he gives you an element that we don't really have in the receiver room, which is that deep threat vertical speed game. And that's what his catches were in this game, right? That's where he was successful, was in the vertical portion of the field. And obviously Jefferson's an all-around receiver. Thielen can still win deep, even if he's not, probably doesn't have the speed that he once did. But, having that third option when you go in 11 personnel and, teams have to worry about Jefferson and Thielen. And then there's also a guy who can take the top off the defense, right? Because Osborne hasn't really had that taking the top off the defense capability if he's been a reliable third down receiver and something like that. But having that kind of interchangeability, how the Bucs have used Scotty Miller, like not this year he was injured, but last year, where you just have a guy who can just run everybody off the field, I think is a really valuable asset moving forward.
The Chiefs have made it such a big deal having speed at 3. Everybody talks about speed at 3, like having somebody that if the defense is playing one high safety or they're bracketing Justin Jefferson, it's so important to have somebody who you get really nervous about. I mean, this is what the Packers do with it's Devontae Adams and then a bunch of guys who you can't really trust to leave one-on-one in coverage, because MBS or Equanimeous St. Brown or Alan Lazard will beat you deep with speed. And it sets up a tough situation for defenses, because if they want to double Jefferson, then they're risking giving up these explosives to guys like Smith-Marsette. So that's kind of who you hope he can develop into, as somebody who defenses get scared about leaving one-on-one without much safety help. So the fact that he was able to show that, go off for 100 yards plus this game, I think is sets up our wide receiver room looking pretty good going forward.
Yeah, and KJ Osborne made a couple plays, which is great. And I think
his whole year. I mean, we've given him lots of love, but like his whole breakout this year, like compared to where we were just 2 years ago, where at first how long was it just like the Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs show, and then the Justin Jefferson, Adam Thielen show, and just nobody else. I mean, felt like the last time we had a good wide receiver 3 was Jarius Wright back in 2015, I think. So it's been a long time, and we've had a couple guys come in and out and float in and out, and the Chad Beebes and the all sorts of different guys come in. But KJ Osborne came in and had, I think, 500 yards on the season.
So, he had 607 touchdowns, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns.
It's a good season.
I mean, that's most productive wide receiver 3 in Vikings history right there. So that's a pretty good setup for the future, assuming, Thielen will.
Especially we might lose Adam Thielen. And that's a distinct possibility this offseason. So it's a good thing that we have some talent, coming up behind him there.
I mean, I don't know if I accept the Jake Reed slander from Nick right there, but
I was gonna let it slide. Jake Reed
was more talented, but statistically, when with Moss and Carter, he never put up 600 yards in the season. So he did have 1,100 yards in 1997. So
we could probably go around in circles on that a little bit. He would. I think if you're playing with 2 receivers like Moss and Carter, I don't know how you get. I don't know how you produce massive numbers behind those 2 guys.
But anyway,
I always loved Jake Reed. I had a 3D.
It was great, really underrated.
Yeah, so I will say I do want to give a little bit of kudos to the defense in this game. Now, granted, it is the Bears, and we kind of did this twice in the Bears game, so I don't know. And a lot of it kind of feels like Matt Nagy gets really cute on 4th downs, right, and tries to prove that he's smarter than everybody else, and actually he's not, which is why he also doesn't have a job. But this team, I mean, we stopped 4 or 5 4th down tries from the Bears.
Number of them, yeah.
So it was really a key performance. And, a few of them were in the red zone, so we're letting up points, but others were situations where it kind of made sense to go for it, where they're on the edge of field goal range and they may punt. And we came up huge in those situations with sacks and that sort of thing. So I think the defense kind of put in a solid last performance for Mike Zimmer, with that being his calling card, right, moving forward.
And you just said it. So let's move along here and some good things, but the reality was it was a meaningless game. And it was a meaningless game because we lost against the Packers, and that ended our season, and everyone got fired. Mike Zimmer's gone. Everybody in that game got fired. Everybody got fired. The only people left are the players. Mike Zimmer got let go. Rick Spielman got let go. This happened about 3 days ago now, as of the recording. Let's first just emotionally, let's talk about that for a second. How do you guys feel about it? I mean, I know that for me, those 2 guys represent some of the best Vikings football we've ever watched. We've had some great teams in their tenure. It's hard for some fans, I think, to remember just how poor the situation was that they took on, and just how improved we have become in so many ways as an organization. I mean, if you look at the way the Wilfs have built up the infrastructure, the literal infrastructure, the buildings that they practice in, the stadium that they play in. If you compare back in the old days of practicing in Eden Prairie, the long ship that was always broken was part of, that was literally our practice facility. Structurally, the team was built up. We had a bunch of shitheads on this roster for a very long time who would do stupid stuff. And Rick and Zim played a major role in sort of trying, at least, to bring people who had their heads on straight to the roster. Just a lot of improvements, genuine improvements to the team on a lot of different levels under those 2 guys. And I think it would be a mistake to not take a moment to appreciate them at the end of this tenure here. How do you guys feel about
it? I mean, I agree with that. I think overall, you should look back on the tenure positively. Obviously, we didn't make the ultimate goal, right, of winning a Super Bowl, but they gave us probably the best moment in Vikings fandom history, right? Like, if you were to, like, I can't think of, and obviously I don't have the history going back to the old days, right? You need to talk to some of the older Vikings fans to see what their thoughts on the Minneapolis Miracle are, but I can't imagine a better moment in Vikings history. Like just the, I don't know, the catharsis of like that play happening, like, oh, here we go again. We lost the game, and now all of a sudden it's just totally flipped on its head. Yeah. So I think that is a huge, huge thing that we want to remember them by, and we should remember the regime by. I do think in the past few years here, right, we've been treading water as a franchise. So I think ultimately it was time to move on. I think there were some cracks coming out, and you're seeing that with some of the reporting with Zim afterwards. I don't think that it's as negative as some people are making it out to be with Zim, but I think that some of the press conferences after the firing might, like, especially Eric Kendricks is the one that got to me the most, just in terms of his talk about the need for communication and like just the presence there of a communicator and somebody you can go to. I think Zim might have gotten a little, and Zim's an ornery guy, right? Like, he's not the happy-go-lucky, like, best friend to everybody on the team, but I think it might have gotten a little stale at the end of it,
Let's also be clear, though, like, there's never a firing that goes well in the NFL.
No, it
never happens. I mean, if anytime this process happens to your team, there's bad feelings. It's just the nature of it. These are highly emotional people, highly wired people who all think that they're the best at what they do, and they are. And so when this happens, egos are bent out of shape, and things are said. And I think overall, though, we as fans, and I hope everybody who entertained us all these years will remember these years positively, because it was a lot of good football, a lot of fun football to watch. Do you guys have anything else you want to add? Nick, you've been a little quiet. Is there anything you feel about the situation?
I mean, my thoughts on Zimmer are pretty clear. I think it's a mistake to fire him. I think the next guy is going to have very big shoes to fill in terms of schematically what Mike Zimmer brought to the defense, I think, and to the team generally. I think, this terrible, horrible, no good, very bad defense that Mike Zimmer led this year, where Anthony Barr missed, 6 games, Michael Pierce missed 8 games, Danielle Hunter missed 9 games, Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks missed multiple games, Patrick Peterson was on IR for a while, and at this end of the day, that defense ranked 12th in EPA per play against, and 16th in the DVOA against. I mean, he was basically, he's dealing with DJ Wanham as his best defensive end for most of the year, and he still winds up, second in the league in sacks. So it's the things he does with his defense are really impressive. He's a really good scheme guy. And I know there's, what you said with Matt about Kendricks is right. His culture, he's a Parcells type hard ass where some people love him. Patrick Peterson had some, like, oh man, I love Zim. I'm really going to miss him. He and I click so much. And, like Terrence Newman will always go to bat for Mike Zimmer. And there are a lot of guys who just like Zim's their dude. Dalvin Cook's the same way. Zim's his dude. We'll run through a wall for Mike Zimmer anytime. And then there are other guys who, that those types of old school type personalities just don't gel with, and they want to see something more, modern or new school. So I mean, I understand the firing. 8-9 is not where anybody wanted this roster to be. I think injuries explain a lot of the bad luck and a lot of the disappointment this year. And, we had some tough breaks in close games as well. Like those games go differently. This is a very different type of season. And I think if Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter don't miss so much time, we're talking about a very different, you're probably looking at the playoffs right now. So I feel for Zim. This is a guy who, slept in his office for 8-9 years straight, literally gave up his eyesight in one eye for the franchise, trying to get it done, and wasn't able to in the end because Zim just never had good luck in anything in his life. So I feel for the guy personally, and it's tough anytime, it's like when Diggs left or when Teddy wasn't re-signed. It's like somebody you've been so personally invested in. You feel so bad for him, but you also understand, the Wilfs, I think, there's a lot of bad owners, I think, in sports, and I don't really think the Wilfs are among them. Their comments of trying to just not settle for mediocrity and bring this team over the top. I think it's really encouraging, and I think you're right, Greg, to talk about, like, let's remember this team used to be the Love Boat Vikings and the 3-13 Vikings, and
it wasn't that long ago.
No, and with Zimmer, the worst they ever were was 7-10 or 7-9, which is you can get a lot worse than 7-9 in the NFL. So I really appreciate what Zim and Rick did for this franchise. I think whoever comes in for them has big shoes to fill. But as sad as I am for them personally, it's also like really exciting. Like it's kind of like when you're looking for a quarterback. It's like when you draft a quarterback, that's the most exciting draft you're going to have in a decade.
So when we talk about football prospects, we talk about floors and ceilings, right? Like what we think this person's, minimum career can be and what we think their maximum career can be. Right now, the state of the team, no matter how the roster shakes out, no matter what happens, the floor for us is much higher than the floor that Rick and Zim took on, which is what I think makes it exciting, is that I don't think it's going to take that much to repair this thing. And to that end, let's talk a little bit about candidates.
So real quick, one last thing for me on Zim is I think that ultimately, and we talked about this weeks ago, right? I'm on the side of, for where we were at as a franchise, it makes sense to fire both Rick and Zim, simply because, the three most important people on staff, we've had them since 2018, right? Kirk Cousins, Mike Zimmer, Rick Spielman. We haven't progressed in that timeline, and it's really difficult to progress in that timeline with Kirk Cousins' contract on the roster. Yep. However, the incentives for Zimmer and Spielman are to keep trying, to keep running that back, to keep extending Kirk or pushing money out so you have more money to spend in the current time frame. And I think the number one thing that moving on allows you to do is reset that. And I think 2022 for us is a good year to reset contracts a little bit, move on from Kirk Cousins, which I think at this point, all three of us are in favor of. I know you definitely are, Greg. I don't know if I'm speaking out of line for Nick there.
I'm trying not to jump at the screen right now.
And I think that's the key thing that this allows us to do. And, it's what we should be most excited about there. On the defensive side of the ball, the Vikings are going to be worse next year unless we hire Vic Fangio or Brian Flores. Then we might have a chance to be as good or, maybe a little bit better just based on randomness and like injury luck and stuff like that.
Better injury luck can go a long way.
But we will not find somebody comparable to Mike Zimmer unless we hire Vic Fangio or we hire Brian Flores and suddenly get like 6 corners who are awesome. Yeah. Because that's the key to Brian Flores' defense, is a fantastic secondary. So
well, you're kind of getting into it. So let's talk about candidates. I thought a fun way to do this, instead of just shooting shotgun shells, the way that people do on Twitter and stuff, let's just talk about our favorites, guys that we've come across the last few days that, names have been popping up all over the net. Let's each just talk about one guy that we're like kind of honing in on, like, someone that we're kind of interested in. Matt, why don't we start with you? What's a name that you've been seeing that you're like, oh, I like that guy. I want to, and we're talking about GMs first. We'll talk about coaches next.
So I don't like selecting guys because I don't think that we on the outside know enough about this. The Athletic Football Show put together a really good
I completely agree 110% on that, by the way. The next 10 minutes of this pod will be completely inane, useless. But that's the fun of it, though. Let's talk about
the Athletic Football Show put together a show talking about like what makes good candidates for head coaching and GM roles. Right, just discussing that. And a lot of the things that it is, like the GM job isn't just you're like a scout and evaluate talent and like who's the best at picking players in the draft, right? It's running a business, logistics, which is like a different skill set from, you know, what I think a lot of people envision it to be. Like you're in control of everything and you have to manage, you know, you have your scouting experts and you have your salary cap experts and you have your coaching staff and you need to manage and coordinate between all those three guys.
What's a great example of this is if you've ever had a chance to watch All or Nothing on Amazon, watch the way the GM is involved in every little bit of everything that happens with the team, right down to the logistics of traveling to London. You know, like they're talking about schedules. They're managing everything. They're literally the general manager. It's right there in the title.
That being said, I guess my number one candidate right now is Will McClay for me from the Cowboys. And honestly, like, I don't really have great justification for it, but the Cowboys have done a very good job acquiring and retaining talent. Like they might be the single most talented roster in the NFL. I mean, the superstars that they have on both sides of the balls. But secondarily, he has to keep Jerry Jones kind of in check. And like, you know, if somebody can manage to successfully run a business with Jerry Jones being like the most excitable person in the universe, I'm sure about a lot of things, you know, that's a pretty good sign to me. So I kind of like that a little bit there.
That's a really good point. Nick, do you have anybody that's been popping up? If you follow Nick's Twitter, he's definitely been talking about some folks, but who's on your radar?
Yeah, I think the important thing to keep in mind with these GM candidates is they're actually coming into a pretty fully built out front office. You know, we let Spielman go, but Rob Brzezinski is staying in place, and Brzezinski is really the cap guy / lead negotiator. So
Rob Brzezinski is ironclad, dude.
Oh yeah,
that guy's made it through how many regimes now? Sorry, go on.
They've made sure too, like they pay him about as much as anybody may do. Who's like the cap guru, and they should, because he's awesome at his job and he's amazing at it. You know, those in-house negotiations and extensions. So, but he's coming into that, and Ryan Monan's director of pro scouting, and Jamal Stevenson, director of college scouting, are presumably staying in their roles. They're both highly regarded in the org, especially Jamal Stevenson. So, you don't necessarily need to get a scouting guru or a cap guru coming into this thing. I think whoever the GM is, he or she should be able to step in and really hit the ground running with the infrastructure they have there, assuming they're not, maybe they want to bring in their own guys. One guy I really like, well, there's two that I really like. One is Ed Dodds, who is sort of,
which team is he with?
He's with the Colts. So he's, I always blank on his name. The GM there, he's his
Chris
second. Ballard, that's right. Chris Ballard's number 2. He was a big guy at the front office in Seattle for a long time, helped basically build the Legion of Boom with all those late round draft picks. So he's a very talented scout, and as soon as he left Seattle, probably not coincidence that once he leaves Seattle, their drafts start to not look so hot. And then as soon as he gets to Indianapolis, their drafts are all just like amazing. So I think he's got a real eye for talent. He's highly respected. He's impossible to coax out of his job because he's kind of like a George Payton type, where he gets a lot of offers, but is very, very patient trying to find what he wants. So that's somebody who I think if they could coax out of Indianapolis would be really, really interesting. But probably my personal favorite is this guy, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, who is this just hot riser out of Cleveland. He's Andrew Berry's number 2 in Cleveland. He's only been there for 2 years, not even, but just extremely highly regarded. He's going to be a GM in the league, and it's only a matter of time. Really interesting background. I think that's kind of one of the draws to me. Is I like having a GM with a different perspective and somebody with a little bit of a different background. He's an Ivy League guy. He graduated from Princeton studying economics, got his master's degree from Stanford, I think also in economics. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then kind of worked on Wall Street.
You're right. I'm looking at his resume right now.
Was a commodities trader on Wall Street, so kind of like went the Ivy finance route and then decided to pivot to sports, and he went into sports analytics. And so he was with the 49ers at their analytics business for a while, and was just kind of, everybody talks to him as a sponge. Like, he's a really good listener, really good collaborator. He's like, I don't know football, but I want to learn college scouting. So he just like lived with the college scouts for a while and absorbed everything from there. From there, Andrew Berry from Philly brings him over. Andrew Berry being promoted out of the Eagles org, another big analytics org. And, together with Dee Podesta, they build that like analytics monolith in Cleveland. And they've done a lot of really interesting things. I feel like the Browns have made a lot of really good decisions. Their drafts have been great. The way they've been navigating the drafts, trading up for JOK, the free agents they've been able to acquire. They've made Jack Conklin for a really good deal at right tackle. The way they've built up that offensive line, they've made the way they've rebuilt that secondary. They've made a lot of really good moves that I think is a good model. And I know.
Hey, and the Browns failed to meet expectations, which is right up our alley. So
yeah, exactly. And I know the Vikings COO is a big analytics guy himself, and he's the one leading this internal committee. And I think you're seeing that in the names they're looking for. They're looking at 2 guys from the Browns org, 2 guys from the Eagles org. Those are probably the 2 analytics. They're at the forefront of the analytics movement in the NFL. And I think Andrew Miller, is the COO's name. He came from like baseball sabermetrics. He was with the Cleveland Indians for a while in their analytics department before being kind of promoted to like an executive role with the Blue Jays. And then that's when he came over to the COO job with the Vikings. So as somebody who thinks there's a lot of edge to be found in analytics, not just with like the Twitter arguments over 4th down decision making, but in like sports science and in terms of keeping your guys healthy, and in terms of finding edges in the draft and finding edges in free agency and understanding edges in terms of game planning and game scouting. So I think that would be somebody who I think a lot of his strengths would lend itself well to the infrastructure we already have in the building. So somebody
like to hire you as an agent, man. You're talking to me really well. Go ahead.
The only drawback I'll say is he's like 32 or something, 33. So he like extremely green, not really an NFL bloodline, blue blood or guy, but just a really interesting background. So I feel like someone like him would be a really interesting fit for the org.
Yeah, that definitely intrigued from what you've mentioned about him. So for me, I think analytics are kind of everywhere, and I know that they're a big deal and everything. What I like to think about,
I hate them.
no, what I like to think about when I'm thinking about the GM situation is I like to look at, because I don't really know how they're going to be, as a manager or whatever. I like to look at where they're coming from, like the team they're coming from, and how that team does things. And like, okay, is he going to soak some of that in and bring it along with us? So I've been looking at a list of, teams that we've candidates we've requested interviews with. And I hadn't even known about this guy until today. And I really like the guy from the Cowboys that Matt likes as well. Because I really like what the Cowboys do with their roster.
They built an incredible roster.
Yeah. Elliott Wolf from the New England Patriots is a name that really surprised me. And I didn't know anything about Elliott Wolf until today. I didn't even know
Elliott Wolf's dad.
Yes, I do. Okay, and that's what I was getting to. His dad built some of the best teams that ever played football and did it for a very long time, kicking our ass up and down the field once in a while. Ron Wolf, from the Green Bay Packers. His son is available, and we're apparently interested in interviewing with him. But more importantly than the bloodlines, which are an NFL thing, I really like how the Patriots have been doing things the last couple of years. I like it a lot, and they've always done things a certain way. But losing Tom Brady and resetting that team and the approach that they've taken, and a lot of the guys that they've drafted are guys that I was circling in the draft, like, well, I really like him. They end up a Patriot. I'm like, oh God, I really like what they're doing over there. And, I don't know how realistic he is as a candidate. He's also pretty young. Interestingly enough, Adolfo Mensa replaced him in Cleveland.
Yeah.
And he went over to the Patriots. Anyway, I really like that name, and that is
no. I think he's a pretty interesting candidate. He's been around a little bit. Obviously, I think he came up and started in the Packers front office and then left for the Browns during the Sashi Brown era there. And that era, honestly, like the dividends it paid. Obviously, it didn't work out like at the time for Sashi, but the dividends that the trading back and that sort of thing paid. But he's been exposed to a lot of different front office approaches, so you would hope that would allow him to kind of put those together and come up with a good process based off of that.
And maybe we can get some of that Pats stink on us. Yeah. You know what I mean? That would be nice.
And the Pats front office people have generally been pretty good coming out, like Pioli and some other stuff. I mean, it's been up and down. Dimitrov has done a good job. So.
They've done a lot better than the coaching candidates, that's for sure. Cool. Those are some really exciting names. And I think that is like the heart of that feeling of being like, ooh, that would be interesting. I think that is really the heart of the reason why it's good that we're moving on. It feels right. It feels like this is the right time. There's a lot of interesting GM candidates, and I think a lot of interesting head coaching candidates. Nick, I know you're not as hot on, we'll get here in a second. But I think there's a lot of interesting head coaching candidates as well. Let's talk a little bit about that. Spend a little bit of time on who our favorite coaching candidates are. Let's switch it up. Nick, let's start with you this time. Who's a head coaching candidate? Assuming, of course, we pick the GM first. Who do you think that we're going to end up having run this team and going into the future here?
I think predictions are hard. I could see a lot of like a Mike McDaniel type or a Nathaniel Hackett type or a Mike LaFleur, like a lot of these guys who come out of the Shanahan McVay system. I think we're kind of, not that we're necessarily, I don't think you listen to the Wilfs and I take them at their word that we don't have a specific type in mind, but I think an offensive guru, a young offensive guru who can hit the ground running with a team set up to do the wide zone stuff that, the Mike Shanahan, Gary Kubiak type offenses. Those are all guys that spring to mind. But I'll say my personal favorite, and you're right that I have a lot of issues with a lot of these candidates. I don't think there's no Kyle Shanahan coming out of this coaching class. It's just like number one candidate with a bullet. But my favorite, and it's a controversial pick, but my favorite is Josh McDaniels out of New England, talking about all the success they've had. And I know
he's coming in hot, people. Nick's coming in hot.
And I know he was a complete disaster in Broncos, but that was like 15 years ago. So I think he's learned a lot. The Patriots offenses are always so well schemed. And I know part of that is Bill Belichick. I know he has his handprints on it, but like people talk about Josh McDaniels like he's just really, really, really good. Like Dante Scarnecchia came out of retirement for Josh McDaniels. Like that's how highly he thinks of him. And there's a reason why Josh McDaniels keeps getting these head coaching interviews, despite how badly things went when he was 30 years old with the Broncos over a decade ago, he's such a brilliant offensive mind. And people talk about him like the way they talk about him, the way they talk about like a Kyle Shanahan. And that's really what I want. If I'm going to move on from Mike Zimmer type, like a really elite schemer, I want somebody with a chance to be just as good of a schemer. And the things you've seen from McDaniel's offense, like the offense they designed for Cam Newton, night and day different from what they did with Tom Brady or what they did with Mac Jones. And it's he's so good designing around his personnel and he's so good mixing things up. And that scheme is always like, it's a completely different game plan depending on the game. They'll come out and they'll run the ball 70 times a game if they want, or they'll come out and they'll pass the ball 70 times a game if they want. And it's so malleable and it's so adjusted to the personnel, and it can really be any kind of system in a lot of different ways. And not just that, but like, you get the problem with Josh McDaniels is one, Patriots and how much of it is Belichick, and two, he reneged on the Colts and he was a disaster with the Broncos. So he's got a lot of big drawbacks to him, and that's why I think you have to like do your due diligence. But the upshot with someone like him is you get the next Sean Payton or something like that, and that's the kind of coach who I think can really be a difference maker in the long term for this franchise. And go ahead.
You said this a second ago, and I wanted to sort of tamp down on it a little bit. Because I'm part of that group that would immediately eschew Josh McDaniels. Like, no, stay away from that guy. Because I still have a long memory. I remember those Browns teams. I remember how big a disaster that was. He was an internet meme, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of teams in this league where you kind of know what the offense is going to do, and you know exactly what they're going to look like because you've seen it so many times, right? Like the Chiefs are a great example of it. Kelsey's going to go over the middle, Tyreek's going to go deep, and if you double him, they'll find one of their speedy guys. It's like the same thing every play, right? And that's fine because they have the personality to do it or whatever, blah, blah, blah. I can't really picture the Patriots offense in my mind when I think about it because it, like you said, it takes so many different shapes week to week. It is really interesting to watch. And I got to say, you've been selling me on this McDaniels. I have to say. And if we went with someone like Elliott Wolf, I think McDaniels goes right to the top of our list, honestly. Really good and interesting candidate. Matt, tough act to follow. Nick came in hot. Who's your guy? All
right. So my guy is obviously Mike McDaniel, just based off of vibes. I don't think there's a coaching candidate that's even
marijuana legal in Minnesota yet. I think that's an important part of the interview process.
Yeah, man. I don't even care. I just have to have this guy coaching my football team. I think it'd be hilarious. Every press conference would be a must watch. He'd just go off the rails. It'd be awesome. On a serious note, I think he is kind of interesting to me because one of the number one things I want to do is fix this offensive line. And he is the run game coordinator / offensive coordinator. I assume Kyle Shanahan handles passing game stuff, but the 49ers do a lot of stuff with their offensive line, and they have more powerful guys in there now. Trent Williams is a freak, so maybe it's not fair to label him as a power guy, right? Because he can kind of do everything. But they haven't had the best talent on that line, and they've made things work. Laken Tomlinson was a washout of the league, and they made him into a quality starter and stuff like that. So I think that is somewhat interesting to me. To go along with my Will McClay pick, I also kind of like Kellen Moore, and I know I don't.
You stole my thunder, Matt. That was my guy.
Okay, well, I'll let you have Kellen Moore because I do have a third.
No, go ahead. I'm just fucking.
No, I actually on a serious answer, it's probably Kellen Moore for me. But the third thing is I don't know. There was a lot of talk, right, about what people wanted to coach and all that stuff, and it's collaboration, communication, all that stuff. That was the party line from the Vikings, right? So I think that's something that are qualities that this head coach is going to have, right? I don't know who is out there like that, but I know from a personal perspective, I want to fix the offensive line, and I want to make sure the defense doesn't regress to an extreme extent. Okay, so what are the answers to that for me? Who are the coaches that could do that to me? Well, there are two that are on the market on the offensive line that I kind of like. Aaron Kromer's one. He was actually out of a job this year. He's gotten some steam, I think, for the Dolphins, although now that Flores is gone, who knows? But Kromer was one, and then Mike Munchak recently had his head coach fired, so he's another interesting one. On the defensive side, I already mentioned the two guys. Flores, particularly as a head coaching candidate, scares me a little bit with the reports coming out of Miami with Tua, right? The Vikings are in a situation where I think they would draft a rookie quarterback, so if there was already contention there, that's probably problematic. But second of all, it sounds like he might want Deshaun Watson, and I want nothing to do with that, so I would consider him as a DC only. But the second one is Vic Fangio. Who hired Mike Munchak as offensive line coach? Vic Fangio. Okay. I want Vic Fangio as my defensive coordinator. I want Mike Munchak as my offensive line coach. You know where I'm going? That's right. Jim Harbaugh. Fangio was the defensive coordinator at Stanford. Fangio was the defensive coordinator at San Francisco. Let's bring Jim Harbaugh in the mix, and let's get the best position coaches possible. And I don't even care if he wears khakis on the sidelines or goes on ridiculous rants or looks ridiculously at the refs or gets 4 timeouts against us. Maybe we have 4 timeouts for us this time. You know what I mean? Or was that 5 timeouts? It was a lot of timeouts that the refs screwed up and gave to him. But yeah, let's go Jim Harbaugh, baby.
Those are good answers. And Jim Harbaugh, I worry about the GM thing though with him. If he wants to take on that role, that's a big fat stay away.
Also, I listened to a whole podcast today that basically was how much Trent Baalke sucks. So maybe it's just Trent Baalke just sucks. Apparently nobody in the NFL likes him, which is weird how he still has a job or got a job in the first place. But
Well, you guys picked some really good candidates. It actually got me excited thinking about all three of those guys. I mean, I really like the idea of a Jim Harbaugh coach team. I really like the idea of that 49ers offense or some form of it.
I don't even know if I love the idea of a Jim Harbaugh coach team. I just love the idea of Vic Fangio as my defensive coordinator and Munchak as my offensive line coach, because I can't have Zimmer. I want Fangio.
I got you. And I really like the idea of a McDaniels coach team. I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to it at all. In fact, I think he's probably in my top three. You teased it already. My guy is Kellen Moore. And I think the reason is plentiful. There's a multitude of reasons. One of them being that we are apparently his number one option. I mean, that's what Judd Zulgad put out there in the ether. I don't know if that's true or not. Could be just an agent talking. So that's kind of exciting because I think he's one of those interesting, young, new school kind of coaches who has gotten a lot of buzz this year. But the thing about Kellen Moore that I really, really like is he's got a really interesting story. You know, it feels like just yesterday I was watching him at Boise State, you know, running around, making plays. I like his demeanor on the field. I know that that's not important, but I like the way that he seems in total control. He's barely older than Dak Prescott. He's like 2 years older than Dak Prescott, and he's coaching him up. And I think there's something to that. I think that takes a level of confidence. There's something to that to me. But also, I'm watching the Cowboys offense go up and down the field, and I've watched Mike McCarthy for many years. We all have here, right? One of the things I was wondering about when he went to the Cowboys was, oh, okay, then Ezekiel Elliott's never going to touch the ball again. This is what Mike McCarthy does. He passes the ball all over the place. He never ever runs, even when it seems like it's, you know, you need to run. Kellen Moore runs the ball, and I think that means that he really is in control of that offense, because I really doubt I'm watching Mike McCarthy when I watch the Cowboys. I feel like I'm watching his thing. And he also does a really good job of mixing up his calls and doing different things with the offense depending on the situation. And I think I'm really interested in Kellen Moore. But if I'm being honest, my number one, I think, has become Josh McDaniels, thanks to Nick. But I got to say Kellen Moore's on my list just because we have to talk about something. But I think the bottom line is there's a lot of guys to be excited about this year. You know, in all these positions, the GM position, the head coaching position, there's not too many giant stinker candidate that we could end up with that I'd be like, oh, yeah. The only real thing that I feel very strongly about is I'd like it to be an offensive coach, not a defensive coach. That's really the only thing that I'm like, ugh. I don't know about you guys, but I feel like there's just a lot of names that I see. I'm like, yeah, I could see that. That'd be interesting, you know? Like, there's a lot of...
I think for me, on the defensive side of the ball, we're not going to get somebody who's better than Zimmer or
exactly.
Vic Fangio would be a total lateral move for Mike Zimmer, and that makes no sense why you would hire him directly as a head coach. That's Brian Flores as a younger guy, maybe a better communicator, but maybe not a better communicator based on like the reports coming out of Miami since he got fired, right? And maybe that's just like the Miami front office kind of, you know, going to ground with the press and kind of painting him to be the bad guy when there's a different problem there. But like, it gives me hesitancy, right? So
I also don't think Flores is quite on Zimmer or Fangio's level.
As a schemer, no, I don't think so. But I think it could be interesting with the youth, and I think he might bring a different attitude, right?
That's a really good way to put that, Matt. Is I think you touched on what I've been feeling without me actually being able to articulate it. Like, if you're going to have a defensive head coach, then there was no reason to fire Mike Zimmer because he's the best one you're going to be able to find.
Maybe there wasn't.
That's a distinct reality. I mean, that's a possibility. There's no doubt about it. But regardless, the future is in front of us, and we have lots of exciting things that are on our horizon.
It really is. It's probably the most exciting offseason we've had since like 2014 when you know we traded up for Teddy or something. It's been a while. Like Zim and Spielman have been around forever. When did Zim come in? Like 2014. So it's been a while. Like so.
2014.
Yeah, man. It's
maybe 2016. 2016 was really exciting up until that third preseason game.
Let's not go there.
2018 was couched by like. We weren't really sure about Kirk Cousins anyway, so it was kind of like.
2018 was
hey, you know what?
Expectations, but we came out of the NFC Championship game with those high expectations. So.
Look, we'll do a whole pod sometime where we just reminisce about the past. Okay, right now we've got our eyes forward, eyes on the future. What would you guys like to see from this team in the future? Let's set aside roster construction and is everything going to be? How are we going to take all the pieces we currently have? Just in general, like if you could redesign this team, what kind of team would you like to see on the field? I'll take the lead here just to give you guys an idea of what's in my head for this segment. I would really like to see a team with a young quarterback. That's very important to me. I really like Kellen Mond. No one else does. Whatever. I don't give a shit. I really like him. I would like to see maybe him get a shot. I'm totally open to drafting someone. I'm sure my opinion on that will fluctuate as I get more into scouting guys and stuff this offseason. I'd really like to see a young quarterback. I'd like to see us shed a lot of cap. I'd like to see us. I don't enjoy trading away players that I've loved, but I think there's a few guys on this roster that we could get a pretty decent return for pick wise, and it would probably be good for their careers to not be a part of this. And I think it'd be good for everybody. I'd like to see some picks rolling in. I'd like to see some aggressive drafts. I kind of miss that aggression that Rick had in the very beginning. I'd like to see a little bit of that from the next person. But I think the main thing is I'd like to see this offense completely reworked. I think we've got pieces that are really, really great. We'll probably hang on to most of them, but we've got a lot of things we need to improve offensively. And I think I would just like to see some changes there. I'd like to see a little more modern approach. But just hang on to the run just a little bit, Give me like that 40% run. We're good. How about you guys? What are some things you'd like to see from the team in the future? Like in your ideal vision? Because we don't know what's going to happen.
So I think for 2022, for me, I would compare it to like what the Eagles have gone through this year. I would Wentz Kirk, if we can. And then I would, maybe draft a guy, although the quarterback class isn't great right now that we know of. See what you have in Kellen Mond, or even like sign a guy cheap as a 1-year stopgap as something to go there. But, use it as a year to reset and shed the contracts. And the Eagles didn't really have to jettison a bunch of their aging high-priced players. Part of that was like their contract reality was that they physically couldn't. Like they just had to push more money in the future because of the cap hit, so it would have accelerated. But like, so we can keep the core players that we love. I feel like, we're kind of looking at this as a reset year and then hopefully move forward from there. But I definitely like the question is, do you keep Kirk or not? Right. That's the future of the Minnesota Vikings. That's what the question is. And obviously focus on the offensive line, I guess, is probably my number one priority. But we got to keep in mind that the defense is going to lose a lot of guys.
Mm-hmm.
So that is something that I think we should keep an eye on over the offseason.
Yeah. Nick, how about you?
I think
I think Nick envisions a team where every player has a calculator in their hand while they're running around. I'm just kidding. I'm fucking with you. Sorry, go ahead.
I would like to see a little bit more analytics friendly approach. That was probably one of my bigger criticisms of Zim, is he was just sort of like, old dog, this is a new trick and I'm not going to do it. And I don't see the edge I gain from this, but there really is an edge in a lot of different ways with football. So I'd like to see that. And I would like to see, significant investment into the defense. I would love to see them draft an early round edge rusher for the first time in forever. I hope they keep Andre Patterson around because I would love to see what he could do with the first round talent, if he can do the things he can do with the later round talents. So I would love to see some new fresh faces on the defense that we can hopefully start to try and build around. I'd love to see Patrick Peterson brought back. I don't think we necessarily need to blow it up, but I do think if somebody gives a Wentz-like offer for Cousins, I think that's really hard to say no to. I don't know if the other team will agree to take on all $35 million of his salary this year.
Steelers. Pittsburgh Steelers.
Broncos. Peyton was a big Kirk guy. I mean, there's a lot of teams. It's going to be musical chairs with the quarterbacks this offseason, and there's definitely more. It's a seller's market for quarterbacks this year with the quarterback, with the draft class looking as it is. So I think there will be buyers for Kirk. Some people seem surprised by that, but I do think there will be buyers for Kirk. So wouldn't surprise me if they extend him too. Like he played in the last 3 years, he has 2 top 5 PFF finishes and 1 top 10 PFF in it. So, maybe we've gone over why those PFF grades probably inflate his actual worth, but he's a good quarterback. He's an above average starter, and you could be a lot worse than having Kirk Cousins as your quarterback. So it would be exciting to get a new young quarterback to build around. You kind of want to be where like the Chargers are, where they've got a head coach that I think a lot of people, last few games maybe Staley's got a little more heat, but like having a Justin Herbert or having somebody like that, just appointment viewing guys that you just really love to tune into, and then pieces on the defense to start infuse the defense with young talent, because it's so bereft of it right now. There's basically nobody under 27 on the defense that is a real building block, unless you really believe in Cam Dantzler as a starter, which I could be talked into, but he's still a little inconsistent to that. So I don't know. There's a lot of different ways they could go, and it'll be really interesting to see what happens. But I think either way, it's going to be a really entertaining and fun offseason, and probably the most entertaining offseason Vikings have had in a while, which is saying something because they always find a way to keep it really interesting. So
yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I will say the one thing you mentioned with the Kirk contract, I have no problem with the Vikings taking on $10-15 million extra in cap hit for this year for a trade where you get the returns. Even taking on that money, and you make his cap hit for the other team $20 million, that gets us under the cap right now. You add $15 million to his guaranteed, send him to another team, you're still, $10 million under the cap after that move. So I think it's a totally reasonable thing for us to do moving forward.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you guys said. Well, so the regular season is over. Playoffs for other people are around the corner. Kindred Skulls is not done yet. We're gonna our goal is to most likely will be around weekly, at least until the end of the year, because presumably this stuff's going to move pretty quickly, and there's probably going to be things to talk about every week. Some of the episodes might be a little short. Some might be on the longer side. We'll see what happens. We hope that you'll stick with us. And once the off season hits, I don't know about the guys, but I have a couple of ideas for video content I might be interested in doing for the channel. I guess what I'm saying is I hope that our listeners stick with us here, even though the season is over. We have things to discuss.
In a weird way, it's like I'm looking forward to the off season, because sometimes the regular season's a grind, man. Sometimes I'll be up at 1 a.m. watching all 22 of a blowout loss, being like, man, why am I doing this? Whereas with the offseason, hope springs eternal. There's a lot of content, and talking future GM candidates is not the heavy lift that talking about what Zimmer's amazing third down blitz package looked like.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man. Content will keep coming. Thank you. This has been an awesome year for our listeners. Thank you for making us. This is why we do what we do, is all y'all tuning in. So appreciate you. There's always some hitches with, your podcast is first getting off the ground. So we're hoping this is the first season of a long run for Kindred Skulls. We appreciate you tuning in.
Yeah, no, I can't say it better than that. Appreciate everybody showing up. And we're, like Greg said, we're going to keep the content coming a little bit. Obviously, we're going to hire people eventually, right? We got to talk about that. We got to break that down. And then once we kind of get an idea of who we're hiring, right? That helps us think about the scheme that they're bringing in, what we might do for players, what we might do at the quarterback position moving forward. So there's a lot of important questions to kind of discuss and talk about. And that's always the fun of being a fan, right? Is you can talk for hours about freaking anything. So
yeah, absolutely. And I happen to be lucky enough to be co-hosting a podcast with two men who are kind and generous in spirit enough not to comment on the fact that I have shaved a mutton chop onto my face. Not one comment from these boys, and I have to hand it to you. That
I was thinking it this whole time, Greg. You audio listeners are being spared right now.
Check it out on the YouTube channel.
My apologies to the YouTube watchers.
My haircut. My wife really wanted me to try one of these, so I was like, "All right, I'll do it finally." So
I
kind of like it.
So I was getting pretty puffy, and I shaved down, and I went chin first, had a little bit of mutton chop action going on, and was like, you know what, not for me. Not for me.
I needed my hairline to come up a little bit, it's got to be up like
I
right
gotcha.
here, but it is what it is. Guys, this was a lot of fun. I'm sure by the next time we talk, we're going to at least have a GM. So see you next week.
Yeah. Appreciate it, everybody.
Any last words?
No, just Skull Vikes.
Digital hugs.
Skull. Love you, bye.
Another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind, and we'll score.